which to me is understanding, labeling, categorizing, sequencing, thinking about the music. And you can also combine that with the visual in a lot of different ways. This is only as effective as your student is musically literate.
Musically what?
Literate.
Literature.
Right? So I can't, my example that I played earlier, if they have no knowledge of what G major is,
Yeah.
that categorization means nothing. Right? So I have to give my student a vocabulary for this to have meaning. Right? Because if I don't have the vocabulary, then there is no meaning. And I get a lot of college freshmen who do not have the vocabulary. Right? And so we have to give them the vocabulary and knowledge of basic harmony, phrase structure, form, all those things, and make sure that that's what they're focusing in on when they're learning. And the last aspect is muscle memory, what it feels like. These are all good things, but they work together, right, to learn along the way. Most students rely overly on muscle and oral perception, right? That's their first go-to. So our job is as teachers is to, yes, that's good. This is a good starting point, but if we don't ever question it or challenge it, then they end up on stage with that voice in their head asking a question and there's panic, right? So we unknowingly encourage this in our students when we let students play music for months and months and months and then send them off to memorize it and don't question what they did. How did you memorize that? Right? Let's see how well you know this. Let's try this game. Let's try that game with specific instructions. We encourage that over-reliance on our weaker senses, or I wouldn't even say weaker, I would say the less reliable, right? Or the ones that don't stand up to the inner voice, right? So when and I just said that, when we sit down with a student and we say to a student, okay, you've got this learned, good job, nice accuracy, it's slow, we can play the piece, right? I'm going to tell you to memorize it, right? And it's as soon as they've got the piece learned with 100% accuracy of notes, rhythm, dynamics, phrasing, balance. Most students, this is the first month of learning a piece. Yeah, go ahead.
Diane, do you, have you ever had them learn a section as you're suggesting, and then memorize just that section and do it by that? And have you found that to be useful? Or,
yes.
So do you think that is a good plan to do when you're, as opposed to just learning the whole thing, then trying to memorize the whole thing?
Yeah,
okay.
I agree. I mean, one of the things, I taught at Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp up in Michigan for 10 years. And one of the things the students up there had to do, they would come in, it was a 10-day camp. We would meet, and there was no audition. So kids had a wide range of ability. It wasn't some elite camp where I was only getting, you know, high-powered people. It was average kids, really, some below average. They came in the first day, and their job at camp was to learn, memorize, and perform a brand new piece they had never seen before, right? And it's a great exercise in really learning effectively. And one of the things I often did with those kids, especially the ones who struggled, was in our first lesson, they had lessons every other day. In our first lesson, we would go talk about how to learn the last page or the last section, and we would learn the end. This goes back to the backwards practicing concept. And so they would learn it accurately, and I'd say, go memorize it. We talk about how to memorize it. They would learn, and we would work backwards through the piece like that.
Okay.
Right? Because students often have that same problem that we talk about with the passage. They can start the passage but not finish it. I cannot tell you how many times I hear kids play and they start and they're fabulous. Right? That first page is awesome. And then the farther they go, the worse it gets. Right? So I actually try to get students to memorize the last part of the piece before they do the beginning portion. And I think it's a great way. They don't have to know the whole piece to start memory work. Right? And that's an important thing to remember. So for most students, it's the beginning of it. And I think that I said all this. For memorization, it's the same, almost the same process that I talked about with learning a piece. Right? That I'm going to sit down and I'm going to take the sections that I established to learn the piece, and I'm now going to use that to memorize the piece. Right? So I'm going to say, let's take this section. I'm going to tell students to memorize this hands separately and hands together. Why am I doing that?
Because the left hand's going to fink out on you.
Yeah.
But why does that happen? Why does our left hand go out why do we have so many issues? Somebody once told me that 90% of pianists' memory errors are in the left
Left
hand.
hand, I believe it.
We all say this. Why? Why does that happen?
Because
It's
there's no right.
the melody.
Right. If I asked a student to sing this sonatina, they would sing yum yada da da dum yada da dum da da dum bum, but they wouldn't sing dee da dum. Right? They wouldn't sing the left hand. And what that tells you is they don't know what it sounds like. Right?
Yeah.
Which means they can't rely on their ear. So when they forget, there's nothing to bail them out. Right? When somebody's playing along in that melody and they go yum da 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 dee, oh, that's not right. Do the yum da 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 dum, oh, and they get the right note into the line, then it triggers a sequence of events that makes everything lock together. And you see somebody like poking and poking and poking, and until they find that right note, they can't go. Right? That is somebody who's relying on the ear. Without the sound, they can't continue. Right? So when the left hand forgets, there's no sound. Right? So they're just at a loss for how to proceed. So I'm going to tell my student, you're going to memorize this hand separate. You're going to memorize it hands together. You're going to play it looking at the keyboard. I want you to look. And as you're looking, I want you to think. Okay, how did this chord change? Oh, the top two notes popped up. Right? Now it's C major, second inversion. Right? With the right hand, look, we have a pattern. Stepping down, da-da-da-da-da. That's a D major 5-finger pattern. Right? Da-da-da-da-da. Oh, that's an A minor 5-finger pattern. And we're going to think about what we saw on the keyboard. All right? And we're going to do that kind of thing. We're going to encourage them to use strategies like blocking. So I'm not just going to let them do it. I'm going to say, I want you to come back with this memorized. I want to hear the left hand alone blocked by memory through the first 8 measures of this piece. Right? And then I want you to play the right hand at half tempo. Why am I saying that? Why the tempo?
Muscle memory.
Muscle memory. Muscle memory only works at a certain speed. Right? So when I play at a much slower tempo than I'm accustomed to, I actually almost eliminate the muscle memory. And then I have to think. Right? And I have to look at the keyboard. And you ever do that? You're like, this, you're going so slow that you're thinking, oh, D, A, and we're thinking about it. And that's what I'm making my students do. And you see, by giving very specific instructions on how to memorize the music, right, and specific strategies that make them think or make them not rely on the muscles, I'm going to end up with a better finished product, aren't I? Right? So I'm going to be very specific about how I do this. Most students will struggle with this type of approach. I'm not going to tell you that this is easy. They're going to have a hard time. I'm trying to think if I said all this, right? They're going to struggle, and it's not going to be an easy process. I found that if I send a student home with these very specific instructions, it might be 4 measures, right? So I'm going to make it really manageable the first time and be very specific. And then what they find is that they can do it and that it worked, and then they buy into your system. Whereas if I say, go do this with the first 13 pages of the Beethoven Sonata, they're going to be like, yeah, whatever. And they're not going to do any of it. But the key of all of this is to teach students that memorization actually is not something that just happens, that it is a process, right? And something that you have to do deliberately, right? And not just let it happen. And I think that issue of memory is at the heart of most pianist performance anxiety. Agreed?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Now, you can't say it's all of it, because don't you still get nervous when you get up there with the score playing in the chamber group or playing? So it's not all of it. I still get nervous, right? It's a different level of nervous, though, when that memory isn't into play, right? And so nothing concerns, I think, any of us as much as the image of us standing up on stage or sitting on stage and all of a sudden not knowing what to do, right? Isn't that like our moment of panic, right? And we've seen kids do it, and it just kills us, right? You don't want it to happen. So if we can perform and focus the memory on this, I think it will help a lot. I think a lot of teachers think that you can't teach memory. I've heard this from, and you know who the word, I'm going to be honest, the worst are collegiate teachers. Right? And I think because a lot of them, let's be honest, I tell these guys this all the time. I tell them, if you're here doing a doctorate in piano performance, you're not average. Right? So a lot of times we have a hard time relating to the average person, the average student, right? And so when I take that person who was a wunderkind at age 8 and has never struggled with memory, never had a memory problem, never had a hard time learning things, sight read, they have a really hard time breaking this down for the average person, right? And so we can't explain this kind of thing. I think you can teach it, and I think you should deliberately teach it at every level. So just to illustrate, I'm going to show you a couple beginning pieces. So here, look at the Love Clapping Song. This is from Hal Leonard. All the stickers are because every one of my children have played this piece. You can see there's 5, 1, 2, there. There's 5 stickers there. They've all got a sticker for it. Right? So all of them have played this. But if I told my student that we're going to learn this piece and we're going to memorize this piece and play it for, sometimes I'll just have a student memorize something for a lesson. It doesn't have to be for a recital, right? So this student's going to memorize this, and they come back and they play it, and they're magnificent. I can say, good job, another sticker for you, and move on. Or I can ask them some questions, right? Did you notice how these two, I might point out that there's 2 phrases, okay? In the next line, it starts the same. And I might ask them to talk about how the first line is different than the second line, because now I know that they're thinking about it, right? They might have just, with a piece this short, isn't it possible that they just played it so many times that it's easy? So I'm not going to let them get away with that. I'm going to ask very specific questions, right? How would you compare the right hand on the first line to the right hand on the second line, right? I often have students say, okay, play this last 2 measures of the first line. Now go directly to the second line and have them play those 2 things back and forth over and over again, so they're actually thinking about how those are different and not just doing it. I'm going to actually have them say, what interval are you playing here? There's a second, there's a third. The left is exactly the same. Right? And I'll ask little questions like that just to make sure that they're realizing that there's 2 little phrases here and how they work together. So with a beginning student, just ask questions. Right? I will often have a student play the left hand while I play the right hand, even at the beginning level. So I'm going to say, you're going to play the right hand. They're going to really have a hard time understanding the counting and how I put that in there. So it's just taking it to another level. Can they put the left hand in the right place when I'm playing the right hand? Right? Can we play this speed? Do they realize that's a triad? Right? All these are questions that you can ask that will help them to think about the piece of music. Yes? I didn't plan this very well. All right, so here's another piece. Elementary level. Then if I have a student who's going to memorize this, this is a great piece, right? We've got, right? I've got the left hand playing, I put the wrong chord, sorry. Playing triads that are in group position, easy to identify, right? So am I going to let my student come back, play this piece and say, good job, they've got it memorized, it's short, most students aren't going to have a hard time with it, right? Or am I going to say, can you play the left hand by itself and name the chords? All right, we're starting at A minor. Now we're going to go to G major, back to A minor. Can my student do that? Right? Can my student play the right hand on the first phrase and then play the second phrase and understand that, look, they started the same, and understand that all that changed was the direction of that last note. They're exactly the same. But instead of playing 2 E's, I actually went up the octave and played it up there. That we're going to break down each phrase and understand how they change, how they're different. I'm going to understand what the left-hand chords are playing, exactly identify the triads, name the triads, right? If you look at elementary literature, it's almost always full of group position triads. And if we miss that opportunity to make our students think harmonically, when they move into intermediate repertoire and the chords are in inversions, and maybe more complicated, we've kind of missed the boat already. Right? So making sure that they're thinking about what it is that they're playing as they're doing it. And again, I love the activity of I play the right hand, you play the left hand, and then we switch, and we do this by memory. If you have a disc clavier, I've done this when I had a disc clavier in my studio when I taught at TCU. I would have my students record the left hand, and then could they add the right hand, right? Just little things that change it up make it really hard. A piece like this, I might even transpose it, right? And make them think about the relationships and, you know, this is just your A minor triad, going down. Can they duplicate that in another key, right? If we could, in the last one, you could have done the same thing, right? Could they, right? If I can transpose it to G, I'm really understanding the relationships. So all those little things you do will help them to really think about the music instead of just accepting, hey, you got it, it's good. My oldest is so resistant to any direction I give him musically. Like, he's gonna look at me. No, I'm not gonna do the dynamics, because you can't make me do that part, right? That the only way I get him to do it now is I don't even tell him. We play the left-hand, right-hand game, and the kid really could be very good. But I don't ever say I want you to shape the phrase. I play the right hand while he plays the left hand, and I shape the phrase. And he can't help but imitate it. It's hilarious, right? He has no idea that he's even doing it, right? Or I'll play the left hand side, and so just by the fact that he heard it played musically, all of a sudden he's thinking about it and doing it. So you can do that with students in a lesson. That, next week I'm gonna play the right hand while you play the left hand by memory. And then reverse it, and those kinds of games. And you can, same thing with the passage that we talked about, the sonatina we talked about earlier. That the same idea of blocking it, identifying the left-hand chords, playing the right hand very, very slowly. What I find with a lot of students is they will memorize the notes but not the fingering. You ever had that happen? And then they know what they're supposed to do, but when they look at their hand, this is part of looking at the keyboard. They look down and all of a sudden they don't know that they were supposed to put 4 on the F sharp. Right? So doing memory games that involve the fingering are really important to make sure they remember not only the note, but what finger was to play that note, so that they keep that muscle memory that they should have worked hard to get earlier. Right? But once a student has that piece memorized, and you can see all these little things, these are just tricks. And I think I forgot to mention, another really good one is just starting spots. Right? A really fun game to do with students is I will actually go through a piece of music and write starting spots. Hopefully they correspond to the learning spots. And then I will tell them, okay, when you come back next week, I'm going to call a number 1 through 6, and you have to be able to start at any one of them. Right? And so start at 2. And I also want them to be able to tell me that at number 2, the left hand is starting on a G major triad. Right? And then the right hand is going to go to C major. And they can start every one of those sections hand separate and together at half the tempo. Right? If they can do that, they really know the piece. Right? If they can't, then it's superficial. Fair? Questions about that or ideas? Go ahead, please.
I remember when I was younger, and the first time I performed on a grand piano from memory, the sound coming at me this way threw me off completely.
Yeah.
And at home, I teach on a
Right?
vertical studio, and so they never have that opportunity. And then when we go upstairs, my light is such that it's a hassle to take my light off of the thing. So I always make sure. I mean, is that a something, or am I just making this
No,
up?
it's true. I mean, the change of environment is hard for everybody. I think these guys would tell you that going into a different room, a different hall, a new piano.
When you take that music stand down, all of a sudden the sound's coming straight at you, and you get distracted by.
Yeah. So I think giving students opportunities to try the instruments they're going to play on is really important. Yeah.
I just have to say it because it happened this morning. I had a boy that's going to do keyboard merits, and he played one of his pieces on one of my pianos. I said, now play it on this one. He goes, what's the difference? I said,
No.
Every piano is different. He's getting glad.
I know. But I think that what the big message to me, though, is from me is that you have to be deliberate with the memory. It's really easy to take the kid that's playing by memory and not having a problem in lessons or even studio class and be like, they're good. And I'm just saying, take it the next step further. Right? Take it another step further and challenge them to think about it, because in the end, they're going to thank you for that security. Right? I had the music teacher at my boys' school say, how come your boys are such strong performers? Because I'll be honest, my oldest has every year played on the talent show in front of the entire 600-member school, and he just nails it every time. And he doesn't. You must make them practice for 2 hours a day. They practice about 20 minutes a day. But I'm down there with them, and I play the left hand, they play the right hand, I make them block the left hand. They're like, Mom, I know it. I'm like, you don't know it if you can't do this, right? And so it's that I am just like stalking them in terms of making sure that they know the piece. Right? And if we can all do that with our students, right? You don't have to be in their home. It'd be nice though. Hunting them down all the time. It's just really challenging them and questioning them. And now I'm doing that out from my years as a performing pianist. And I know that these are the things I do that make me feel confident when I get up in front of people. So I'm just passing that along. Otherwise, they're just going to rely on their ear and their muscles, and they're going to be hit or miss. right? And these are the things that make you more reliable. A lot of times you watch that person who always manages to nail it, and we think, oh, they're just a gifted performer.